All right, so to kick this off, I want to tell a quick story that will act as sort of an overview for everything that I'm hoping we can talk about. The first film class I ever took was a summer film class, and we were shooting on Super 8. And it was the first time I ever actually came up with movie ideas and had to pitch them to other people. And the instructor in the classroom had made everyone go around the room. We all had to pitch our ideas for 3-minute Super 8 films. And when that first experience, I remember what everyone feels when they tell somebody else their movie idea. You don't want to hear anything other than "that's brilliant, that's great, go shoot that movie." But our particular instructor, he listened to my idea, his head sort of cocked, and he said, "Okay," and then he started asking questions. And he started asking questions: have you thought about doing it this way instead of this way? Have you thought about maybe changing your approach, because I've seen that movie too many times. And the questions would continue, and then we'd keep going around the room, and other people would pitch their ideas, and in my head I'm thinking, that's a terrible idea. But he would do the same thing. He would cock his head and say, okay, and he would ask the same sorts of questions. And as he sort of teased out the idea that they were working with, why they were passionate about it, what kinds of approaches they were thinking about in terms of how to shoot it. And as it teased out, the idea got better and better. And when the films actually came in, a lot of these ideas that I thought were terrible turned out to be pretty good. Years later, I was the same instructor's TA. And this time we were teaching something that's a little bit more akin to what you guys are doing, what we're doing in this room, which is really low-budget, do-it-yourself filmmaking. It was another student course, but it was filled with Peter Stark students, and those are producing students. So these were people who had their eye on film and television, and even though they were making things at a tiny budget, were again generating all these ideas. And the same professor would encourage these people to come up with movie ideas, with TV ideas. He always told them we have to be idea factories. And every time, as his TA, I'd hear these ideas in class. In my head, I'm going again. This sounds terrible. I can't stand this idea. But he would tease things out of them. He would ask people like just questions like, are you thinking about approaching it this way? Is it a dark comedy, or are you going to go broad comedy? Are you going to cast this type of person or this? Do you really want to do a movie about trench warfare when you have only $500? And they go, yes, I really want to do this movie. And I'd say, well, how are you going to do it? They would say, oh, we're just going to shoot close-ups, we're going to do off-camera sound. And the more they talked about it, the better the idea started to sound. And again, a lot of these films amazingly turned out wonderfully. Now, he was the type of instructor who knew so much about film, knew so much about film history, was so kind of charming, self-deprecating. He was one of those guys that you wonder, like, if you're so brilliant, why are you teaching me in a summer course? And I can say that because I teach at the same school. I'm sure my students are going, if you know so much about screenwriting, how come your last 2 movies were flops? He always, but his idea of always focusing on the process taught me the approach to ideas that I've carried with me since then for 2 decades. He's always asking questions about asking the question, have we seen this before? If we have seen it before, what kinds of movies have gone over the same sort of subject matter? He would always ask practical questions. Do you have the resources to make this film? Do you have access to these kinds of locations? He would constantly ask questions that would probe and force you to develop the idea further. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? So really, the idea is just the stepping stone to a whole host of questions, and those questions are what I think we're going to be talking about on this panel. Not like how do you know if a movie idea is good or not, but rather, okay, you have this idea, and for whatever reason it's sparking passion in you. What are the next things you need to do with this idea, or how do you find those ideas for yourself, and what kinds of questions should you be asking? And I'll finish the story by saying that years after I went to film school, I would go to the same coffee shop with Kane and Jacques, and we would just write every morning. And sometimes I would see this professor. He'd walk in, and I had heard that he was, he'd stopped teaching. He was having trouble finding work, and he had a new wife, and they had a baby. And I ran into him, and I was kind of hoping things were going to turn out well for him. And I asked him, what are you working on now? He said, well, actually, I'm working on a TV show. And I said, what's the TV show about? He said, well, I'm a writer director on the show, and it's about a high school chemistry teacher who gets cancer and decides to cook crystal meth. And of course, I said to myself in my head, that's a terrible idea. So the point being, the idea is not necessarily the most important thing, it's the process that comes after it. So with that in mind, I want to ask the people on the panel, first of all, how do you get ideas, and how do you collect ideas, and where do they come from? So I'll start with you.
Oh, hi. Ideas. Am I close enough to this thing now? Okay. Ideas and where do they come from? Well, how do I collect them? I can answer that one really easily because Sean teaches this. I believe in this and teach this. A bucket. This is my bucket. I have a thought, I have an idea, I have an inspiration, I have a word that comes to my head, I have a memory, I have a flash of a dream, I hear a conversation in a bar or a restaurant that I want to steal. It all goes right there. I may never use it, I may never go back to that, but every time you even put those words to paper and get it through your arm or whatever device you're using, whether it's a pen or pencil or even a recording, by doing that process, you're making that moment part of your experience, and it's in your creative subject matter. It helps form you.
Yeah, and going beyond that, once you've got all these ideas, how do you go through them and develop them further? What triggers, what's the next step once you have all this stuff kind of put together?
Well, the next step for me is to look for something human, something that's about relationship, character. I love plot, but I love it when it's based in humanity. That's what I think everybody can relate to. I'm not interested in clever, so when I look at my ideas and I start to reflect back on them, the ones that jump out at me, I say, oh, that's clever. Those are not the ones that I tend to go for, right? Those are great in a pitch meeting with a network, and they really are. The clever ones are great. I actually heard somebody pitch 2001 meets Private Ryan once, and I was like, wow, I wish I thought of that. Okay. But what I do is I look for the human story, and then I look for that nugget of something that actually makes me want to know more about the character. Because if I want to know more about the character, if I want to dig deeper, I'm an audience too. Right? And too many filmmakers and actors and technicians in our industry, they get so caught up in the work and the struggle of the work instead of the process of the creativity that they forget how to be an audience. And I think you always have to look for something that stirs you, because it's hard to make a film, it's hard to write a film, and you need to write something that stirs something inside of you, that excites you, that scares you a little bit, right? That's okay. And that's what I start doing is I look for nuggets, little details. I don't start from a big idea. I start from a small idea, and then I let it reveal to me where it wants to go. That's how I work.
All right, let's continue. What kind of questions did you ask yourself?
Well, I'll tell a hands-on kind of story. About 10 years ago, I was struggling and up-and-coming short filmmaker, and I had a friend who was an actress, and we always said, oh, they don't make, the good female-driven things. They don't make these, movies that speak to young women. And we talked about it all the time, and we wanted to make something, but we didn't know what that was. It was just an idea of making something for women to do, to direct, to star in, a story about women. And then I had a baby. She's actually sitting back there now. She's 10. And it was, I was the first of my friends to have a child. I was living in Hollywood and trying to adjust to this huge change in my life. And we looked at each other one day and we said, this is the story. Two friends, one has a baby, one doesn't. And the idea for my first feature just came rushing out. And it was that nugget of two friends going through a big life change together. Now, the film was developed as a big studio movie, and then that didn't work. It was developed as a half-hour sitcom, and then that didn't work. Eventually, we made it as a low-budget $300,000 film that we filmed, in our backyards with her starring and me directing. But it was always that little idea that was so personal and so real and so easy for us to develop because it was our real life. And as we grew and as my child grew and we kept developing the project, that part never changed, even though it changed formats, it changed plot, everything about it changed. But that nugget remained. And that's what I always look for, is what is the nugget of the story, and is it something that you can keep living with and keep developing? And when everything else changes around it, that nugget remains the same. And my next feature, which also was a tiny little $150,000 film shot on the Canon 5D. It was, again, I had these tapes I recorded of my grandmother before she passed away, and I did not know what to do with them because I wanted to honor her memory, but they weren't the thing that could make a documentary or make a memoir, and they ended up being the heart of my second film. And again, everything changed around it, but those tapes that meant so much to me, that never changed. And now I'm working in television a lot, and that's the thing. The little piece of the story, the little heart of the story that you connect to, that you relate to, really relate to, and it will never change no matter what notes you get, no matter, like you said, who's cast, who's not cast. That heart, it's the heart of the idea.
One of the important things that you just said also is the personal experience. The reason that writers go to cliches like write what you know, especially in the film business and working at such a low budget, you have to ask yourself, what experiences do I have? What do I have access to that nobody else has? What do I bring to the table that's unique? Because there's so much media out there. If you come from the standpoint of trying to think of an idea that, in general, it's not going to be as vivid. You're not going to be able to stick with it as well as an idea that's unique to you. And taking your personal experience with your daughter, or taking those tapes, which are very, very specific to you, that's a really strong place to start. Oh, okay.
So I think it works. I guess for me, I have two answers to this question. The first place I usually start is, for me, there's two kinds of ideas. There's an idea that you want to make a lot of money off of, and it's oftentimes a high concept idea, and there's a very specific way that you go about doing that. And so for me, when I'm thinking of something just to sell, because I work in television and for the studios and that kind of thing, it's primarily concept based, and something that I feel, usually I try to put a spin on it. If it's a trope that you've seen before, try to find a way to reverse the gender or set it somewhere else or do something like that. The other side would be an idea that I want to make independently, which is primarily more what I'm focused on right now. And for me, that always starts with the character. And, I guess the way that I know that there's something there is I can't get it out of my head. It's like if you go shopping and you see a pair of shoes but you don't buy them, but then you just keep thinking about them and thinking about them, and hopefully when you go back they're on sale, but then sometimes you don't get them, and then it's really sad because you think about them for years. Like, what adventures could I have had in those shoes? And that really is, sort of how I approach it. And so if there's a character that I find I've really connected to, a lot of times on some subconscious level, that's the reason. The reason is because I am that character. And I have seen myself in every protagonist that I've written, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman, whether they're 80 years old. Like, that's a facet of something that's going on with me at the time. And I can look back on the scripts that I've written and things that have gotten made, and they all really are reflections of what I was going through internally during that time. So for me, that is where I start when I think about a film that I really am going to care about, not just a high concept thing that I don't really give a shit about and I just want to make money off of, because it's fine to have those thoughts too. You just kind of need to organize your brain around, like, okay, it might work, it might not. Like, those are the ones that you kind of, you have to learn how to leave in the dust. Sometimes you have a great idea and people don't see it. Or sometimes someone else is doing the same idea at the same time and you're not lucky. But for the ones that really stick with me, that matter, it's like what she said, years can go by, miles can go by, like many drafts can go by, but the root of what it was that brought you there in the first place often really stays with you. And for me, that is really the character. And once I figure out who the character is, I figure out what they want. What is keeping them from getting what they want? Where are they? What, how does it smell? How does it look? Like, I find that if you can't see the trailer in your head, then you're not ready yet. But if you can see it, if you know how it's gonna sound, if you feel the music, like that means that you're kind of ready to get started, at least for me.
I want to ask two follow-up questions, actually. One is, you talked about the two different starting points for bigger Hollywood or television projects versus personal projects. Do you ever use any of there's a certain sort of analytical process that comes to making these high concept films, but is there a time when you're making your personal films where you kind of have to do some of that too? Like where you have to, I don't know, this is a great idea and the core is there, but I'm going to have to switch it up a little bit to make it work or to make it viable?
I think it depends on the situation you're in. I think if you have, I have 2 films produced that I didn't direct and one that I did. And the one that I directed that actually premiered at Sundance this year, I did not make any compromises. Having been a writer for hire for over 10 years and having to always bend to what other people thought would make something more likable or something more sympathetic, I really had no interest in telling a story that was safe. And it's, my film's a comedy. It's not a dangerous film by any stretch, but I wasn't afraid.
Comedy can be high risk.
It absolutely can, but I think it just kind of depends on where you are. My movie, you spoke a lot about like making a film based on what is available to you, and that was absolutely how I approached my film. I was like, okay, I'm not going to get a lot of money. I'm a first-time filmmaker. My ensemble, did not have big stars in it that were going to help me get $5 million. I shot the film in my house, in my neighbor's house. I made my backyard and my back porch and changed them made them look like restaurants. And it was like, I knew what I had available and I knew what I wanted to say, and I found a way to combine both of those things, which I think is really important. So if you're setting out to make a film like that, don't fucking compromise. Keep your vision, because it's the only time you're ever gonna be able to have it. Because if you're lucky enough, it's funny because my situation is a bit reversed. Like, I started working in the studio system, so I've been wanting to go smaller. I think the more that I work, as opposed to bigger, because the smaller it is, the more control you have over it. Like, and especially with everything that's available to you today, with the cameras and everything. This is what I always say to people when they say, "How do you get started?" Writing costs nothing. You can spend an hour a day. I don't care how busy you are, after your kids go to sleep, after you get off work. That's how I got started. You can spend an hour a day writing your script. You can start tonight. Nobody can stop you, and that doesn't cost any money. So that is where you start. A project always starts there. And so if you're doing something for yourself, do it your way.
Yeah, I would underscore that again, because the one thing you can control if you have $100,000 to make a film is the vision, is the creative side, are the characters, are things like the dialogue. You're going to be under so much financial constraint. That is definitely the thing you shouldn't compromise on.
Can I say one other thing? You know what's really interesting to me is you look at filmmakers, and I don't know, like if you look at a film like Clerks, which I think is a brilliant film, which is made for nothing, with no name actors. I wouldn't change one thing about it, because the fact that it's so homegrown is what makes it so charming and amazing. You look at filmmakers and their leaps when they go to bigger budgets, and oftentimes the charm is lost. And because people get very caught up in, I have to show off, I have to do this, I have to put this actor in it. And it's, there's very, for me, I think Wes Anderson is a great example of somebody who, he kept himself, but he made himself bigger every time, and it feels true to him. It still always feels like a small movie to me, because it's him playing, and you feel that when you watch the film.
The other thing I wanted to follow up on was the idea of seeing the trailer in your head, because I hadn't thought of that before, but that's a really good way to think about whether you're prepared to go to your movie, because if you can see the trailer, you can see things like the tone of the film, some of the major shots, what things are going to look like, the style. Well, what are the things, when you can see the trailer in your head, what can you see?
I mean, I always, while I'm starting to sort of get pregnant with the idea, I make the soundtrack right then. So I know how it sounds, and for me, that often informs what it's gonna look like. Like the film that I'm writing right now, I started out in a very different place that I ended up, and I ended up with the film taking place in the 60s. Because it just, the sound of it, and the fashion, and the way it looked, and the way people spoke, and I went back and I watched a bunch of films from the 60s and just like the manner of speaking, I was like, yeah, that is my story. And setting and sound and tone and music, that is the whole big main character of the film that's just as important as the dialogue, in my opinion. You have to know your world, and like anybody can go and direct something, but like to create a world, that sets you apart, I think.
I also just want to follow up on the control you have when you have nothing, because it is so true that when you don't have a lot of money, you also have a lot of freedom. And the first film I did had, I think, 17 babies and 15 dogs, and all the things that if you were in a bigger budget would cost so much money, and everyone would say, don't do that, you're crazy. And yet when it's your friends' babies and your friends' dogs and you're shooting in the park, it's doable. And it's funny because I've gone the opposite way, from the micro budget to bigger. You really do get hemmed in when you have more resources, because suddenly you have these huge crews and you have all these people that are in charge of what you're able to do. And there's so much fun. Like, we all have iPhones now. Michel Gondry just made a beautiful short on an iPhone, and we have that power to make things without a lot of people telling us what to do anymore. And the same thing you said, it's like writers write and directors direct, and you can do it quite easily. Easier than having a lot of money.
That's great. Let's go over to this side. But tell us a little bit about your experience with ideation and the films that you've seen and the films that you've done where you feel good ideas are generated.
I have two mics, actually. I think for me, the big thing is authenticity. I think it can kind of really shine through in a way that is unexpected. But I just think when you're watching, like, whatever it is, 2,000 shorts a year or whatever, it's just like you see so many films that are similar stories, and I feel like you can tell almost immediately if the director, if the writer are really in it and really know their world and really spent enough time with the story. Because like you guys were saying, like the equipment is just like grown exponentially, and everybody's able to make these like beautiful, glossy films. But I think to some extent, sometimes people end up compromising a little on their ideas and don't spend enough time with their ideas to really kind of live and breathe them and make them as best as they can be, and they kind of just jump straight into production, and then you have this like beautiful, glossy looking film that doesn't actually do the idea justice because that hasn't been fully fleshed out.
Do it from a really interesting perspective. One of the troubles that some of my film students have is they start to make short films, but they haven't really watched a lot of short films. They've seen a lot of features and television. And so they end up going over the same ground that you see again and again. So could you talk a little bit, like, now as a filmmaker, how would you advise people to, other than, watching 300 short films the way you have to, how would you advise people to avoid these kinds of, I don't know, the cul-de-sacs, this ground that's been gone over again and again and again?
Can you use the handheld mic? I'm sorry. Can you use the handheld mic?
Sorry. Well, I think for me as well, as in the things I've produced, I always kind of try to ask myself and ask the director or the writer kind of, why now? Why this idea? And why you? Like, why are you the one who needs to be tackling it? Why is this relevant? Why does this need to be made right now? Like, I think relevancy is huge, and kind of tying it back to something that is immediate and important and significant is just huge in terms of like guiding the vision forward for that.
No, that's precisely it. Those are the questions that Peter Gould, a Better Call Saul guy, used to always ask his students. The really hard ones that you don't want to hear. Why are you making this movie? People, they're like deer caught in the headlights. What are you asking me about? But it's important because, again, as artists, all we have is what's unique to us and what's specific to us. So that if you go even just a little bit general, you're liable to be going over the same sorts of things. Any particular pet peeves, the ideas that you've seen again and again and again, that you're like, oh please, no more movies about this?
I mean, that's really hard because I feel like it's funny, but I mean, again, uniqueness is a huge thing where it's just like if there's something that is unique to you and is different to you. But I hate to say that as well because I feel like sometimes you do see very familiar stories, but if they're just done really well or bring something different to the table that is specific, then they can feel fresh, So it's one of those kind of ambiguous things where you do end up seeing a lot of the same stories, but if they're just tackled, again, within a really authentic voice, or with perhaps a different perspective, but it's within a familiar setting, that can still be equally powerful. That said, please less drone shots. Like, I don't know why every short filmmaker feels the need to include a drone shot. Like, I think sometimes it can lend to the story, but sometimes it's just like, we get it.
It's a drone shot.
It's a drone shot. We've had a great budget.
Look at that
I think there's a certain excitement that happens when you're making your first movie with all these toys to play with.
Exactly.
But I think it's really key to always be in service of that nugget that you guys were talking about. If it's in service to, like, look at what a genius little director I am with my drone, it's probably not in service of that core emotional idea that drove the film. And you, Thomas.
Oh, me again. Okay, I'm just going to talk loud. Okay, so I'm going to make it quick because we have new voices, and that's a good thing. As I said on the last panel, I was on that one too. As I said on the last
You should be on
panel,
all panels.
as I said on the last panel, I'm kind of tipped here by Kane. I believe the starting point of writing is not writing what you know. I believe, for all sorts of reasons, you have to write what your obsessions are, what you feel, what you don't have an answer to, what is unresolved inside you, stuff that scares you, like Kane said. Now, unlike the rest of the panel, I differ a little bit because I take another step before character or story. And I believe the process that you start by is creating an original, and it's a scary word, thesis that's going to guide your script. So what you try to do at first is begin the process of not premeditating story. Anna made a great point. If you just go into story and often character, you will write a cliche. I have a list of wisdoms that I created, and this is one of my wisdoms, that if left to your own devices, you'll probably write a cliche. So the idea here is not to premeditate the character, and I'm all about character, not to premeditate the story, but to start the idea of what you want to write. What is your thesis? Because if you take that and you put that on your desk in front of you, that main idea you're after, you'll be filtering that through whatever your character becomes, and then she'll take us through the story. And that's part of my individual process as a consultant. The other thing that I do, and somebody else mentioned this, is I believe in what I call predecessors. And predecessors are when you get the idea, or maybe you just have the genre of your movie. Maybe it's back here. I want to write a horror film. I want to write a woman's film, whatever. Then you go and you watch what I call overall all the film predecessors you can get your hands on. And when you start doing that, you'll start noticing commonalities. You'll start noticing the same point being made. You'll notice the same visual design being made in each film and so forth. And then you begin to X those out. I'm not doing that. I'm not going that. And you may go back to your thesis and start to get more in touch with personal point of view, or maybe it'll just start crossing out what you originally had. And then you begin the process saying, now what type of character energy, what kind of energy would she have to do this? And that's where the character comes from. And from character comes from.
Those are great points. The one about theme is one that's reflected in all the film courses that I've taken, and particularly by a woman named Nina Foch, who is a directing teacher, and she always told us to figure out what the one word that our film was about. If we can summarize it in one word, then you put that word up on your wall so that when you're making the millions of choices that you're having to make, you can keep going back to that. She also said to put on your wall, change or die, but that was another thing.
That's a different one.
Can I just jump in and say that I think I agree with you 100%, and I was perhaps not as articulately saying the exact same thing.
Oh, you're great.
No, but I'm saying, like, when you
I
said
love you.
I differ, I love you too. No, but like when you say I differ from, it's like that idea that everything else around it can change, but that core is
Yeah.
the same.
I want you to start less with even the character. I met some cool woman and she was like this. Like one assignment that I give I'm teaching writing right now at Chapman, and one of the things that I want them to do is just go out and meet a stranger. But I don't want you to turn that into a narrative about that stranger. I want you to come back and tell me the subtext. I want you to tell me the undercurrent of what that person is not telling you. So I'm always a step back before progressing and linking everything, including character.
Yes, that's great.
I'd also underscore the idea that write what you know is a cliche, but writing what you don't know is actually often more pertinent to filmmakers, because a lot of times some of the stuff that we all in this room know, we know a lot of cliches. We've seen a lot of movies. We've had a lot of generic experiences, but taking some, again, emotional nugget and then using that as a springboard to research, to talk to people, to imagine. Actually going to places that you're afraid of or that are a little dark and you're not sure where it's going to take you, I think is a good way to light up that originality. Let's continue on and let's talk a little bit about the practical side of things. Since we are talking about writing for a particular genre, these low budget do-it-yourself films, what kinds of things are you thinking about when you're in the idea stage? You're not quite going to script yet. That pertain to the fact that you know that you're going to go out and do this for $3 and a bus ticket.
What a setup! $3 a bus ticket. Well, okay. I think. Well, first of all, many things keep coming around. Thesis, nugget. What was the other one? World, right? Yeah, all of these things are always the most important things that you need to find, and they all inform one another. But on a practical side, for instance, the feature film that I just co-wrote and executive produced, we started writing that 13 years ago. And it was a little big film, and it led itself to some large production values and 168 extras in one scene. And that's not how I make a film on a weekend, right? So it took us years to raise the money and to get everything just right to be able to make that. And even then we were still kind of having to force the cause, right? But I go back to what a lot of people are saying, which was, for me, how I really love to make a film is to, more creatively, and this is selfish for me to say, is to wake up on a Wednesday and to have Jacques say, I need you to make a movie on Saturday. And we don't have a script, we don't have a cast, and we start to go, who do we have? What can we write? What scares me, right? And at that time, I was dealing with a lot of death in my family and with friends, and I started exploring that, and I had 2 days to do it. And on Saturday, after the Wednesday, we started shooting that 10-minute film. And to that, I think what you have to do is you have to ask yourself honestly, as an artist, what do I have to tell this story available to me? And then I think way more important than that, to the theme. My theme was death and loss and longing and mourning. That was the theme, right? And it was very personal at the time. But it couldn't be a tear fest because that's not what I wanted to tell. That wasn't what it was about, right? And it was about something deeper and more dreamy than that. But you also have to ask yourself honestly, what do I have to say?
Continuing on, you all started talking a little bit about the practical concerns, when you're coming up with ideas. Talk a little bit more about that. Like, what kinds of things are you thinking about in terms of, I have this in front. I know I have access to these things. What can I do with them?
Well, after doing my first film that had all the babies and dogs and 70 locations, and in LA where you have to get permits or you get in trouble, I said, okay, I'm gonna make a movie, and I'm gonna put 3 actors in it, and that's it. And it's gonna be really a story about characters relating to each other. But then I said, I see a lot of these movies, and they're all set in LA, and they don't look amazing, and I want to take the beauty of the 1960s Italian and French films, and how do I do that? And I said, well, if we go shoot in Italy, wherever we turn the camera, it's going to be beautiful. And if we find a very small place that isn't used to having people film in it, they're going to be excited, and all of our little periphery characters can be real Italians who work in the cafe or drive a taxi, and they're going to be really excited and not annoyed that we're there, shooting next to their apartment. And so we had $150,000, and we used it on plane tickets and a hotel and pizza. And I wrote the script looking at Google Earth. And I go, that castle's really close to where we're staying. I'm going to write a scene in that castle. And then we bought tickets to go into the castle and filmed until they kicked us out. And I'm so happy with the way the film looks because it is beautiful. And a lot of times we feel limited by small budgets to it just has to be in a room and these people talking. And we have these huge vistas of the Bay of Naples, and we have just a lot of production value. And we use one China ball and a Canon 5D, and the 3 actors, a DP, myself, and a sound guy who was also the editor. And we filmed in the water. We rigged the sound onto a little floaty boat that we had to push into the grottos. But we have grottos. And, so it's I always look at it as what can you do? There are no rules. It really is what can you do and what can you create with what you have. And sometimes it will be just filming a movie in your room and in your house, and that will be amazing if it's a story that you really relate to. But also kind of looking outside of those restrictions and getting really creative. And what you said is so smart too. Deadlines, accountability. I don't have a Jacques, but throughout my life I've had people, I don't know where he is, but I've had people who I kind of make I have a partner. Even though it's a story that I know I can write by myself, let me have a partner to write it with so that we can be accountable to one another and we can put deadlines on ourselves. And having that partnership and that group of people around you who believe in what you're doing and you believe in what they're doing is really key. It's not the auteur, the idea of the auteur who operates in a bubble is just not, it's not a real thing anymore.
And you have to make sure that your sound floats.
Yes, the sound did float. Ziploc bags.
No, that's important. What I'm hearing is that if you have that emotional nugget and you have a clear idea of your theme, and then you build some, evocative characters for yourself, then you can start asking yourself, okay, this could play out in any number of locations. What do I have access to? And the idea of spending all your budget on plane tickets and pizza is just brilliant. Because too often I think. The first choice, I'm going to put this conversation in a car, which turns out to actually be pretty expensive, and you could do it for nothing to just have them walking down the sidewalk, But anyway, tell us a little bit about. Oh, you have one? 10. All right. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about your practical approach. When you're coming up with ideas, what practical things determine where you go?
Well, first off, I want to say that I love your story, and that's so amazing. And where can we watch it? And what's it called? And-
It's called While We Were Here.
Okay.
It's on, I believe, iTunes.
Okay. All right. What town in Italy?
Ischia.
Okay, because my dad was from Naples.
Oh, my family is from Naples.
really?
Too. We tracked down some cousins. The cab driver. It's a distant cousin.
I feel like everyone is there somehow. I know we can talk about it later. I guess to answer your question, I think that there's no substitute for experience. That's why I'm a huge advocate of making a short film before making a feature film. A lot of people I feel like are really resistant to it. People that I know are in particular. They're just like, no, I'll just go make the feature. I don't need to make the short. And I'm like, okay, you're not gonna know anything about who you are as a director until you direct something. It's also a great way to experiment and try everything that seems wild and crazy. And if you don't like the way it turns out, like no one is the wiser. You don't have to show it to anybody. You can just go make another short film. So I think, like she was saying, you have to make a film with 17 dogs before you realize that like you shouldn't make a film with 17 dogs. You shouldn't do that to yourself if you like yourself.
That's true.
Yeah, yeah. I was waiting for you to be like, on my next movie, I made it with 2 dogs. Downsizing. But and so I think that you also, it's how you learn about what your style is if you direct something small before you direct something big. I think when I set out to make my first feature, I knew how I wanted to shoot it. I wanted to do a lot of wides and I wanted to do a lot of one-shots, but it was also a very economical way to shoot. Not a lot of people shoot like that anymore. Like you get on set and my DP and other people were like, you don't want all this extra coverage? And I was like, no, because I'd rather work really hard on this one shot, this one take, and have it be great than like moving around all day long trying to get coverage from every angle and we're not gonna get anything really magical. And so I think that like, going back to basics, a lot of times watching the old movies, kind of like you were saying, get familiar. If you want to write a rom-com, go back to Billy Wilder and all these things and see how they did it and see how they shot it, because there's so much value in seeing what worked. It was really funny because I've seen like every Noah Baumbach film and every Wes Anderson film. I'd never seen Jules and Jim until like 2 weeks ago, and I watched it and I was kind of blown away because I was like, oh, and I thought they made it up themselves, like everybody who does that, and you go back and you watch these films and they're so inspiring. And, when Truffaut was making Jules and Jim, he was just trying something new. But, so I guess the point is there's no substitute for experience. If you want to try something, try it out when it's not going to cost you a lot of money. Learn your strengths, learn what you need to get better at, and I think also what Anna said is so true. I think so many people are so anxious to start shooting. They'll shoot it anywhere, with anyone, with whatever they have on the page, and they're like, I'll get it in the edit. It will turn into something magical once it's all assembled that wasn't there, and I think very rarely does that happen. Like, you should have it vetted. You should have like 5 people you really trust read it or look at it or whatever and say, you know what, yeah, I think you're ready.
Yeah, just quickly, I can't underscore more. Shoot short films, shoot lots of them. If you have ideas for a feature, workshop it, because in order to get this kind of uniqueness that we've been talking about, you need to learn how to fail. You need to learn how to and believe me, if it's your first day of directing is your first day on your feature, then your first short film is going to be your first 4 days of shooting, and it's all going to get thrown out because it's going to be one disaster after the next. Make those disasters happen on the cheap, and then you'll also discover that it's okay to fail. That you'll figure something out and you'll make things work. And anyway.
Could I just say one thing really quick in terms of what you were saying is, failing is so important. Every other art form, you get to fail. You make a painting, it's terrible, nobody sees it. The weird thing about film is you make something terrible, which I've done, a lot of us have done, and everybody sees it. And so making those little short films that nobody sees is the best thing you can do for yourself. Not be so reward oriented. Practice your art. It is an art. It is a craft.
I'm going to open it up for questions right now and try to ask this side questions because I'm actually deaf in this ear and I really haven't, attended to them as much as I should. But please, questions.
Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll break the ice. I'm coming from a kind of funny background. In 22 hours for my first sci-fi I ever wrote, I was offered $9.47 million, which I passed on because I discovered, talking to the producer, that bad credit is the same in credit cards as well as film. Bad credit's the same or worse than no credit. So I divorced that situation something like 16 years ago. I'm kind of kicking myself in the butt now. But what I want to ask you is, I come from a place of, familiar with East Indian chakra systems of the heart is the middle point between the heaven for inspiration and the earth for energy. And that's where I've always come from for writing. 2 scripts, almost produced with both of them. All these crazy authors. But how do you divorce yourself from that initial inspiration that is your love to going, okay, we're going to do with this whatever it will. It's either going to get destroyed or created. But how do you do that transition from, I've got a project, but I can't let it go?
I think as a producer, I just always appreciate directors and writers who have a mix of ambition and are tied to their idea and flexibility, especially when you're working with really tiny budgets. I think it's just kind of balancing the two and staying true to your vision within the realm of what you're actually able to do. So it's just kind of being able to kind of have it be something almost elastic that is always tied to your heart. It's like a muscle and it's growing, but it's always coming back. So being able to do those 2 things is always able to keep it authentic, I feel like. Last year we worked on, I was one of the producers on Terrence Nance's sci-fi short, and we shot it for maybe $10,000, which is insane for a sci-fi short with visual effects and all of that.
I wish I'd known you 16 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the other producers who had worked on all sorts of features were like, this is the most stressful shoot of my life. But it worked out because we were just kind of, he has such a unique vision and was able to kind of translate his world from the page with the resources that we had. So it's kind of the flexibility around that. And stuff is always going to go wrong, and it's never going to be exactly how you picture it. It's a cliche that they say where it's you have a movie on the page, you have a movie when you shoot, and you have another movie when you edit. And that's absolutely true. It's not, if you're so stubborn that you're only sticking to what is on the page, then you're not going to be able to evolve and transform it into something better.
I just have a really quick comment. You make the film that you want to make, not the film you think you should make. Number 1. Number 2 would be, and again, very quickly, if this puts the fear of God in you, good. I had a filmmaker when I was at LA Film Festival who made a short that was very famous. He got on the 10 list for the Oscar nomination, blah, blah. Played a bunch of festivals. And he got a $10 million first feature. He came to me and said, Thomas, what do I do? And I go, how's the script? He goes, it's shit. He goes, but I want to do it. It's $10 million. I get all this stuff. I get the cherry picker. I get all this stuff. He made the film. It never got distributed. It completely disappeared, and he has never worked again. Because he was held accountable as a first-time filmmaker with $2,000 budget. So you make the film that you can and that you really imagine.
Yeah, I passed because I knew I didn't have the fortitude to pick that nut up and run with it at that point.
Yeah.
Let's get another question.
Yeah, I was really curious about when you were speaking about the idea of thesis, and I think it was maybe touched on before in forms of theme, but can you elaborate on that?
That's a tough one.
Can you repeat the question? Can you repeat the question?
The question is, can I elaborate on what it means to have a thesis, or what a thesis is?
Is it like a good log line?
No, it's different than that, because a logline can also suggest story. It's really, a central core idea or meditation that you believe in.
Isn't it kind of like a mission statement?
It's like a mission statement. That's a better way to think of it, sure.
A statement of truth rather than like a log line or
Truth.
like a theme might be one word.
Truth to you,
Yeah.
but not necessarily to everybody else. And something else that's very much a part of contemporary cinema right now is instead of making a movie that's bent on telling everybody the way it is, mofos, Your job is often to suggest, to just put your idea out there and allow your audience to complete what they believe your expression is. That it's a very delicate line because when you create, when you write, we often seem to want to master everything, tell everybody the way it is. Sometimes suggesting is it, and it's really in style in film right now, where people come out and they're like, I'm not sure what that film was about, but I'm still thinking about it. That's a really good sign that you're an artist.
All right, one more question? Go ahead.
Anna, I noticed that you started something called the Nonplussed Film Festival. Can you talk a little bit about why you did that? I mean, you work for like Outfest and LA Film Festival and Sundance. Why did you feel the need for Nonplussed and where do you think filmmakers can fit into that festival?
So Nonplussed actually came out of this underground music venue called Nonplus Ultra that I run with Paul McCaffrey, who's right over there. And we started it together because I was working for so many festivals and seeing so many films that I thought were really, really interesting, but for one reason or another would be perhaps, it's hard to describe, but not, sometimes a little too rough or not quite fully executed in the way that you'd think, or perhaps didn't quite, like, were challenging things in a different way, and just there were all these films that I thought that were very DIY and kind of avant-garde, and sometimes they would find spaces at these other festivals and sometimes they wouldn't, and we just wanted to create a space that was for experimentation and for more avant-garde kind of things that would challenge audiences a little bit and just be a little in your face and loud and crazy and not always put together in the way you'd expect a film to be. So we just wanted to create a space for that and tie it to like music and the culture of underground spaces that has been suffering a lot in LA. So we wanted to tie that back to film because some of these spaces are often very music driven, and we think that there's such a kind of a cross operation that happens between those two, and so we just wanted to give those places a space. And so we had it at Zebulon this year, which is a venue in Frogtown, and went really well. We're hoping to have it again next year.
All right, that's all we have for this panel. I want to thank all you guys for speaking. I learned a lot.